Hello everyone, kindly hit the subscribe button on your screen and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The day I walked into the wrong hospital room was the day death stopped being my enemy. Room 423 instead of 432, a simple transposition of numbers that changed the entire trajectory of my life. I was supposed to be visiting my college roommate after his appendectomy, clutching a ridiculous get-well-soon balloon and a greasy bag of contraband fast food. Instead, I found myself standing awkwardly in the doorway of a dimly lit room where a woman with translucent skin and hollowed cheeks lay perfectly still, her eyes closed, monitors beeping a quiet rhythm beside her. I should have backed away, should have checked the room number again, should have apologized for the intrusion and quietly closed the door, but something about the absolute stillness of the room, no flowers, no cards, no personal items scattered about, made me hesitate. There wasn't a single indication that anyone had been there to visit her. "Are you another doctor?" Her voice startled me, raspy and thin, but with an unexpected hint of humor. Her eyes were open now, pale blue against the stark white of the hospital sheets. "If so, you're the first one to bring a balloon, and whatever's in that bag smells significantly better than anything they've served me." I'm in the wrong room," I stammered, feeling heat rise to my cheeks. "I was looking for 432. "This is 423, she shifted slightly, wincing with the effort. "Though you're welcome to stay if you'd like, I'm not exactly overwhelmed with visitors." I hesitated, the balloon tugging gently at my wrist as if urging me forward. "I'm Alex," I said, taking a tentative step into the room. "Eliza," she replied, "terminal cancer patient and official hospital long-timer." She gestured to the chair beside her bed. "Your friend can wait 5 minutes for his food to get cold." Something in her direct gaze dared me to run away. I found myself sinking into the chair, placing the fast food bag on the small bedside table. "How long have you been here?" I asked. "This stay, 17 days. She reached for the water cup on her tray. "Overall, on and off for the last 8 months, since the diagnosis." I watched as she struggled slightly with the cup, her fingers trembling. Without thinking, I reached out to steady it for her. Our fingers brushed, and I was struck by how cold hers were, like touching marble. "Thanks," she murmured. "The nurses are always telling me to use the call button, but for something as simple as a sip of water, seems like a waste of their time." "No family to help?" I instantly regretted the question as her face closed off slightly. "My parents died years ago, no siblings, friends have their own lives." She shrugged, a barely perceptible movement. "People get uncomfortable around the dying, can't blame them really." The casual way she referenced her own mortality knocked the air from my lungs. At 28, death wasn't something I confronted regularly. Yet here she was, probably not much older than me, speaking of it like an unwelcome houseguest who had overstayed its welcome. "How old are you?" I blurted out. 26, her lips curved in a slight smile. "Though I've been told I have the soul of an 80-year-old philosopher, apparently impending death makes one profound." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I did something impulsive instead. I opened the fast food bag and pulled out the burger and fries I'd brought for my roommate. "Hospital food is notoriously terrible," I said, offering her the bag. "Want to share?" Her eyes widened slightly, then crinkled at the corners as she laughed, a sound so unexpected and bright it transformed her face entirely. "Are you offering contraband to a dying woman? How rebellious." "Is it against your dietary restrictions?" I asked, suddenly concerned. "Probably." She reached for a fry with delicate fingers. "But what's it going to do? Kill me?" The dark humor surprised a laugh out of me, and something shifted in the air between us. "Tell me something about yourself, Alex who visits the wrong rooms," she said, savoring the fry with closed eyes. "Something real, not what you do for work or where you grew up, something that matters." I thought for a moment, strangely compelled to give her an honest answer. "I collect other people's grocery lists," I admitted. "The ones people drop in the store or leave in carts. I have a whole box of them at home. I think they're like tiny poems about people's lives." Her smile then, genuine, intrigued, felt like a gift I hadn't earned. "That's exactly the kind of thing I wanted to know," she whispered. We talked for nearly an hour, my friend's hospital visit completely forgotten. As I reluctantly stood to leave, promising to return the next day with a book she'd mentioned wanting to read, I realized something that stopped me cold. In 60 minutes with a stranger, I'd felt more alive, more present than I had in years. What I didn't know then, couldn't have known, was that the woman in room 423 had less than a year to live. And that somehow, against all odds and reason, I would spend those months falling irrevocably in love with her, learning what it truly means to live even as death shadows every moment. I reached the doorway and turned back, meeting her eyes one last time that day. "I'll see you tomorrow, Eliza." Her smile was tired but genuine. "I'll be here," she replied. "I'm not going anywhere, yet." Before I continue, kindly hit the subscribe button on your screen. True to my word, I returned the next day, and the day after that, and every day for the 3 weeks Eliza remained in the hospital. My roommate, the one I'd originally intended to visit, had been discharged long ago, bemused by my sudden attachment to the girl in 423. I couldn't explain it to him. I couldn't explain it to myself. "You don't have to keep coming," Eliza told me on my 5th visit, though her eyes brightened visibly when I walked through the door. "I'm sure you have better things to do than hang out in a hospital room." I shrugged, setting down the book I'd brought, a dog-eared copy of poetry by Mary Oliver. "Actually, I don't. My apartment is empty except for a dying fern I keep forgetting to water, and my job editing technical manuals is mind-numbing. You're easily the most interesting part of my week." "Wow," she said, reaching for the book with those delicate fingers that had begun to feel familiar to me. "That's either incredibly sweet or incredibly sad." "Both," I admitted, watching as she caressed the cover of the book. "I've been going through the motions for years, working, sleeping, occasionally remembering to call my mother. I didn't even realize how numb I was until—" I stopped, suddenly self-conscious. "Until what?" Her eyes, sharp despite the medication, found mine. "Until I walked into the wrong room," I finished quietly. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, it was charged, like the air before a storm. Eliza finally broke it, her voice softer than I'd heard before. "They're sending me home tomorrow. Hospice care instead of hospital care. Same outcome, different scenery." My heart sank. "Oh," the syllable fell between us, heavy with implication. This was it then, the strange interlude ending as unexpectedly as it had begun. "I have an extra bedroom," she continued, not looking at me. "It's full of books and art supplies I don't have the energy to use anymore, but there's a futon under all of it." Her fingers worried at the edge of her blanket. "My hospice nurse comes daily, but she doesn't stay. And her voice caught, the first crack in her composure I'd witnessed. "I don't want to die alone in that apartment." I reached for her hand before I could second-guess myself. "Tell me your address." 2 days later, I stood in Eliza's apartment, a duffel bag of hastily packed clothes at my feet, wondering if I'd lost my mind. The space was small but filled with color, paintings on every wall, bookshelves overflowing, plants somehow thriving on every available surface. It was the home of someone who loved life, who collected beauty, who had planned for a future that was now being systematically dismantled. Eliza sat in a wheelchair by the window, looking out at the street below. The hospital bed delivered that morning dominated her living room, a stark reminder of why I was there. The hospice nurse, a kind-eyed woman named Josephine, had just finished showing me how to help Eliza take her medications, how to recognize signs of pain even when Eliza wouldn't admit to it. "You can still change your mind," Eliza said without turning from the window. "This isn't what anyone signs up for voluntarily, especially not a stranger." I moved to stand beside her, following her gaze to the children playing in the park across the street. "We're not strangers anymore," I said simply, "and I'm not going anywhere." That night, after helping her into bed and making sure her pain medications were within reach, I sat in the chair beside her and read aloud from the poetry book until she drifted to sleep. Only then did I allow myself to cry silently for this woman I barely knew and the unfathomable injustice of her situation. The weeks that followed established a routine of sorts. I worked remotely from her apartment, taking breaks to make sure she ate, to help her to the bathroom, to simply sit and talk when she felt up to it. Her good days became precious gems we collected, days when she could sit outside on the small balcony, when she laughed freely at my terrible cooking attempts, when we watched old movies and she insisted on pausing to point out particularly beautiful shots. "What did you want to be?" I asked her one evening as we sat side by side on her balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in improbable colors. "Before." "An artist," she replied, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I was for a while, sold some pieces, had a small showing at a local gallery." She gestured vaguely toward the paintings inside. "Then I got sick, and suddenly all those creative dreams seemed irrelevant." I studied her profile in the fading light, the elegant line of her jaw, the hollow beneath her cheekbone, the slight furrow between her brows. "Would you want to paint again? I could set up an easel right here." She turned to me then, surprise evident in her expression. "Why would I start something I can't finish?" "Why would any of us?" I countered gently. "No one knows how much time they have. The difference is, you're aware of your deadline." Her laugh was sudden and genuine. "Deadline? That's morbidly perfect." She considered the idea, looking at her hands. "They shake too much now, the medications. So it'll be abstract, expressionist, a new phase in your artistic journey." A week later, I came home from a grocery run to find her at an easel I'd set up, wearing one of my oversized button-downs over her pajamas, splattered with paint. The canvas before her was a riot of color, blues and purples bleeding into each other, shot through with veins of gold. It wasn't technically perfect, but it radiated energy, life, defiance. "It's you," she said when she noticed me watching. "How I see you." I moved closer, transfixed by the swirling colors. "It's beautiful." "Don't be too flattered," she warned with a small smile. "I'm heavily medicated." But as I helped her clean the brushes, her hands too weak to manage alone, I noticed tears tracking silently down her face. When I brushed them away with my thumb, she caught my hand and held it to her cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, "for making me feel like an artist again, for making me feel like me." I don't remember which of us moved first, only that suddenly my lips were on hers, gentle, questioning. She tasted of the mint tea she'd been sipping, and something essentially Eliza, bright, intense, fleeting. When we pulled apart, both breathless despite the chasteness of the kiss, I saw fear in her eyes. "I'm dying, Alex," she said, her voice raw. "I can't offer you anything but heartbreak." I took her paint-stained hands in mine. "You've already given me more than anyone else ever has," I told her, the truth of it reverberating through my chest. "You've taught me how to actually live." That night, as I held her against me in her hospital bed, her body fragile but her spirit indomitable, I realized with terrifying clarity that I was falling in love with a woman who was running out of time. And despite everything, the inevitable loss, the certain pain, I couldn't bring myself to regret a single moment. As summer faded into fall, Eliza's condition ebbed and flowed like a tide we couldn't predict. There were mornings when she woke with unexpected energy, insisting we go to the small park across the street, her frail body bundled against the chill in a wheelchair I'd grown adept at navigating. And there were days when even lifting her head from the pillow seemed to require strength she no longer possessed. "Tell me about your childhood," she asked one gray afternoon, rain pattering against the windows as she lay curled against me in her hospital bed, which had become our shared space despite its clinical nature. "I want to know what shaped you." I told her about growing up in a small coastal town, my father's early departure, my mother's quiet resilience, about catching fireflies in mason jars on summer nights and setting them free before bed, about the summer I broke my arm falling from a tree and how that led to discovering books during a long, inactive recovery. "Now I understand the grocery list collection," she murmured, her fingers tracing lazy patterns on my arm. "You've always been collecting fragments of other lives." "What about you?" I asked, realizing how little I knew about her history, the years before illness claimed center stage in her narrative. She was silent for so long I thought she might have drifted to sleep, I was a military brat, she finally said, moved every few years, never learned how to put down roots. Her voice grew distant. Maybe that's why I'm not afraid of this final move. I've been practicing all my life. I tightened my arm around her, as if I could physically anchor her to this world, to me. Were you close to your parents? My father was a ghost in his own home, even when physically present. My mother tried to fill the empty spaces with activity, hence the art lessons, the dance classes, the constant encouragement to create. She smiled faintly. She died while I was in college, aneurysm, one moment there, the next, gone. Is that why you're so accepting of all this? I asked, the question that had been haunting me since I met her. You've had practice with loss. Her laugh held no humor. No one's ever practiced enough for their own death, Alex. I'm not accepting, I'm furious. I'm terrified. I just hide it better than most. She shifted to look at me, her eyes suddenly fierce. Every morning I wake up, and for just 1 second I forget. I think about what I might paint that day, what we might do, and then it crashes back, the knowledge that I'm running out of tomorrows. I kissed her forehead, her temple, the hollow of her cheek, each touch an inadequate comfort against such monumental loss. I'm sorry, I whispered, the words pathetically insufficient. Don't be sorry, she said, just be here. And I was, through the good days that grew increasingly rare and the bad days that stretched into weeks. Through the night she spiked a fever so high that Josephine, the hospice nurse, nearly called an ambulance. Through the morning I found her sitting on the bathroom floor, crying silently as clumps of her remaining hair came away in her hands. Just cut it all off, she said, looking up at me with red-rimmed eyes. I'm tired of finding it on my pillow. I knelt beside her, gathering her into my arms, careful of the increasingly prominent bones that seemed to threaten to break through her skin. Are you sure? I'm sure. Her smile was wan but determined. Besides, I've always wondered if I could pull off the Sinead O'Connor look. That afternoon, I set up a chair in the bathroom, draped a towel around her shoulders, and carefully ran the clippers over her scalp. She watched in the mirror, her expression unreadable as the last physical vestiges of her precancer self fell away. When I finished, she ran a hand over the smooth dome of her head and let out a long breath. Well, she asked, meeting my eyes in the mirror. Beautiful, I said truthfully. Without her hair, her eyes seemed enormous, luminous pools in her pale face. Her features, always elegant, now had an otherworldly quality, as if she were already halfway between worlds. Liar, she said, but she was smiling. That evening we received an unexpected visitor. I opened the door to find a woman who could only be Eliza's friend from before, the time in her life I'd never known. She introduced herself as Wren, her expression cautious as she took in my presence. Eliza stopped answering my texts months ago, she explained, clutching a small gift bag. I've been worried. The last I heard, she was back in the hospital. I led her to the living room, where Eliza was propped up in her bed, sketching feebly on a pad balanced on her knees. The shock on Wren's face at seeing her friend's transformation was quickly masked, but not before Eliza caught it. I know, Eliza said dryly. I look like an alien extra from a sci-fi film. Wren crossed the room and hugged her carefully. You look like someone fighting one hell of a battle. Their reunion was awkward at first, laden with the weight of unspoken words and the gulf of experience that now separated them. But as they talked, glimpses of their former closeness emerged. Inside jokes and shared memories creating bridges across the chasm. When Wren finally asked the question that had clearly been burning in her mind since she arrived, "So, how did you two meet?" Eliza reached for my hand and smiled. He walked into the wrong hospital room, she said, her fingers intertwining with mine. Best mistake anyone's ever made on my behalf. Later, as Wren prepared to leave, she pulled me aside. How bad is it really? She asked, her voice low. Bad, I answered honestly. The doctors initially gave her 6 months. That was 7 months ago. Wren studied me, confusion evident. And you met her in the hospital. You've only known her during all this. Yes. So you know you're falling in love with someone you're going to lose. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. I'm not falling in love with her, I corrected gently. I already have. After Ren left, I found Eliza watching me from the bed, her expression thoughtful. You could still walk away, you know, she said. No one would blame you, certainly not me. I sat beside her, taking in the graceful lines of her face, memorizing them as I did daily, hoarding these images against the future I couldn't bear to contemplate. Is that what you want? What I want, she said carefully, is impossible. I want years I don't have. I want to wake up beside you when we're old and grey. Her voice broke slightly. Since I can't have that, I want the next best thing, to know you won't spend the rest of your life haunted by my ghost. I took her sketch pad from her lap. On it she'd drawn a simple scene, two figures sitting on a bench, watching the sunset, our silhouettes recognizable despite the minimal lines. I choose this, I told her, tapping the drawing. Whatever time we have, and yes, I'll be haunted afterward, but I'd be more haunted by the knowledge that I walked away when I could have stayed. That night, as moonlight spilled across her sleeping form, I made a decision that others might call crazy, impulsive, even inappropriate. But watching Eliza fight for each breath, each day, had taught me that convention was a luxury afforded to those with time to spare. I slipped from the bed and went to my laptop, spending hours researching what I'd need to make my plan reality. By morning, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I just needed to find the courage to ask her. The ring was nothing fancy, a delicate silver band with a small opal that caught the light in flashes of blue and green. I found it in a tiny antique shop 3 blocks from our apartment, having slipped out during one of Eliza's longer afternoon naps. It reminded me of her paintings, multifaceted, luminous, containing worlds within worlds if you looked closely enough. I carried it in my pocket for 3 days, waiting for the right moment. The thing about loving someone who's dying is that you become acutely aware of time, how it slips through your fingers like water, how a bad day can rob you of precious hours you'll never get back. So when Eliza woke on a Thursday morning feeling stronger than she had in weeks, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. Let's go to the rooftop, I suggested after breakfast. Our apartment building had a small communal garden on the roof that few residents used, especially now that autumn had fully settled in. Eliza raised an eyebrow but nodded, allowing me to bundle her in a thick sweater and wrap a soft scarf around her bare head. The elevator ride was silent, her body leaning heavily against mine for support. Even this small excursion would exhaust her, I knew, but some things needed to be said under an open sky. The garden was deserted, golden leaves scattered across the concrete planters. I settled Eliza on a bench overlooking the city, tucking a blanket around her legs. The morning sun cast long shadows, illuminating her profile in a way that made my heart stutter. "You're planning something," she said, her eyes narrowing suspiciously. "You've had that look for days, like you're solving a complex equation in your head." I smiled, taking her hands in mine. They were cold despite the gloves she wore, and I rubbed them gently. "I've been thinking," I began, my rehearsed speech suddenly evaporating, "about life, about time. My 2 favorite light conversation topics," she quipped, but her eyes were soft. "Before I met you, I was just existing," I continued, pushing through my nervousness. "Working, sleeping, occasionally remembering to water my plants. I wasn't unhappy exactly, but I wasn't really living either." She squeezed my hands encouragingly. "These past months with you have been the most real, most alive months of my life," I said, my voice growing steadier. "You've taught me to see beauty in unexpected places, to create meaning even when everything seems meaningless." "Alex," she began, but I shook my head. "Let me finish, please. I know our situation isn't conventional. I know what the doctors say, what the statistics show." I pulled the small velvet box from my pocket, watching her eyes widen as understanding dawned. "But I also know that I love you, Eliza, not despite the circumstances, but including them. Every part of you, every moment we have, it's all precious to me." I opened the box, the opal catching the sunlight. "I don't want to waste a single day we might have together. Will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes, spilling over and tracking down her hollow cheeks. For a long, terrible moment, she just stared at the ring, her breathing ragged. Then she looked up, her expression a complex mixture of joy and heartbreak. "You know this is insane, right?" she whispered, "marrying a woman with an expiration date." I nodded, throat tight, completely insane. "And you want to do it anyway? More than anything." She took a shuddering breath, closing her eyes briefly. When she opened them, there was a certainty there I hadn't seen in weeks. "Then yes," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "Yes, I'll marry you, Alex." My hands shook as I slipped the ring onto her finger, where it hung loosely on her thinned hand. We both stared at it for a moment, this symbol of a future we both knew was limited. Then she pulled me toward her, our lips meeting in a kiss that tasted of salt and promise. "Soon," she murmured against my mouth, "let's do it soon." We were married 11 days later in our apartment, Eliza too weak by then for any other venue. Josephine, her hospice nurse, helped her into a simple cream-colored dress she'd ordered online. Ren came, along with my mother who flew in overnight, her initial shock at my whirlwind romance with a dying woman giving way to understanding when she met Eliza. A chaplain from the hospital performed the ceremony beside Eliza's hospital bed, which we decorated with fairy lights and the dried flowers Eliza had been pressing between the pages of her sketchbooks. "I, Eliza, take you, Alex," she recited, her voice barely above a whisper but unwavering, "to be my husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health." She paused at those words, a sad smile touching her lips. We both knew which part of those vows we were living in. "To love and to cherish, till death us do part." Till death us do part. The traditional words had never sounded so imminent, so tangible. When I slid the simple gold band onto her finger, accompanied by a silicone ring guard to keep it from slipping off, my mother was openly weeping. Even the chaplain, who must have seen countless tragedies in his hospital work, blinked rapidly as he pronounced us husband and wife. Our wedding reception consisted of cake that Eliza could barely eat and champagne she couldn't drink with her medications. But when everyone had gone and we were alone, she looked at me with such naked love that it physically hurt. "You know what the best part of this is?" she asked as I helped her change into comfortable pajamas, her body trembling with exhaustion. "What's that?" "I get to die as your wife instead of just your girlfriend." She touched my face, her fingers cool against my cheek. "There's something profound in that, don't you think? That I'll have been truly, legally yours, even if just for a little while." I couldn't speak past the lump in my throat, so I just nodded, gathering her carefully against my chest as if she might shatter. That night, as she slept fitfully beside me, I allowed myself to confront the reality of what we'd done. I had married a woman who, according to her doctors, had weeks, maybe days left. I had tied myself legally and spiritually to her inevitable loss. And yet, holding her as she breathed unevenly against me, feeling the unfamiliar weight of my own wedding band, I couldn't summon a single regret. What I didn't know then, couldn't have known, was that our wedding day would mark both a beginning and the beginning of the end. That the progression of her disease, which had seemed to plateau for weeks, was about to accelerate with a cruelty that would test the limits of our newly spoken vows. Married life with Eliza was nothing like the traditional honeymoon phase. Instead of romantic dinners and passionate nights, our days were filled with medication schedules, doctor visits, and the increasingly difficult task of keeping her comfortable. Yet somehow, in those difficult moments, I found a different kind of intimacy, one forged in the crucible of impending loss. The first major setback came just 3 days after our wedding. I woke to find Eliza's side of the bed damp with sweat, her body burning with fever. Her breathing was labored, each inhale a painful rasp that sent panic coursing through me. I called Josephine, who arrived within 20 minutes, her face grim as she examined my new wife. "We need to increase her pain medication," she said quietly, adjusting the dosage in Eliza's pump, "and start the oxygen full-time now." The oxygen concentrator arrived that afternoon, another medical intrusion into our home, another reminder that our marriage existed in the shadow of death. The clear tubing that now ran permanently to Eliza's nostrils seemed to physically tether her to her prognosis, limiting her already shrinking world even further. "I'm sorry," she whispered that night, her voice muffled by the mask she needed to wear while sleeping. "This isn't exactly what you signed up for when you proposed." I lay beside her, careful not to disturb the tubing. "Actually, it's exactly what I signed up for," I countered, gently tracing the prominent line of her collarbone. "For better or worse, remember, this is just the worst part." She smiled faintly, her eyes already growing heavy from the increased medication. "Promise me something." "Anything." "When I'm gone," she said, the words slurring slightly, "don't let this, what's happening to me, be all you remember. Remember the woman who painted you in purple and gold, the one who beat you at Scrabble even while on morphine." I swallowed hard, nodding, "I promise." As October bled into November, the leaves outside our window turned and fell, a melancholy parallel to Eliza's decline. She spent most days now either sleeping or in a twilight state of semi-consciousness, the medications necessary to control her pain making lucidity increasingly rare. I treasured those precious windows when the real Eliza surfaced, her wit intact, her eyes clear and focusing on mine. During one such moment, she asked me to bring her sketchbook. Her hands trembled violently as she tried to hold a pencil, frustration evident in the tight line of her mouth. "Let me help," I offered, moving to sit behind her on the bed, my arms encircling her wasted frame. I guided her hand with mine, the pencil moving across the paper in shaky but deliberate strokes. Together we drew simple shapes, a house, a tree, the sun. "It's us," she said, looking at the childlike drawing with apparent satisfaction. "In another life." "Tell me about that life," I encouraged, resting my chin gently on her shoulder. "We live by the ocean," she began, her voice dreamy. "You write novels instead of editing technical manuals. I have a little studio where I paint every day. We have a garden and a dog, something scruffy and badly behaved." "What's the dog's name?" I asked, playing along with this fantasy that pierced my heart. "Picasso," she decided, "because he chews up all the furniture, but we love him anyway." I laughed softly against her neck, breathing in the scent of her, different now, medicinal and sharp, but still essentially Eliza. "What else?" "We have dinner parties on the beach. You grill fish that we buy from the local fishermen. Our friends bring too much wine, and we stay up late telling stories around a bonfire." Her breathing hitched slightly. "We grow old together there, very, very old." I closed my eyes, letting the image wash over me, this parallel life we would never have. "It sounds perfect." "It would have been," she whispered. The hardest days were the ones when she didn't recognize me at all, when the combination of medications, pain, and the disease's progression left her confused and frightened. On those days, I would sit beside her, holding her hand and telling her stories about us, about how we met, about our wedding day, until something in her eyes would clear and she'd squeeze my fingers in recognition. "There you are," I would say, relief flooding through me. "Welcome back." "Was I gone?" she would sometimes ask, confusion evident. "Just for a little while," I'd reassure her, never telling her about the hours she'd spent calling me by another name or asking me when her mother was coming to visit. One particularly difficult evening, after she'd been agitated all day, refusing to eat and pulling out her oxygen tube repeatedly, I found myself at breaking point. Josephine had just left after administering a sedative, and Eliza had finally fallen into an uneasy sleep. I slipped out onto the balcony, closed the door, and broke down completely, great heaving sobs that felt torn from the depths of my being. I wasn't crying just for Eliza's suffering or for the future we wouldn't have. I was crying for the sheer exhaustion of loving someone through their dying, the physical toll of lifting her increasingly deadweight body, the emotional labor of smiling through my own heartbreak, the constant vigilance required to monitor her symptoms. I was crying because part of me, a part I hated but couldn't deny, sometimes wished for it all to be over. A soft tap on the glass startled me. I turned to see Eliza standing there, leaning heavily against the door frame, her oxygen tank dragged behind her like a reluctant pet. I quickly wiped my face, horrified that she'd caught me in this moment of weakness. You shouldn't be up, I said, opening the door and moving to support her. You shouldn't be alone, she countered, her gaze clear in a way it hadn't been for days. The sedative seemed to have calmed her agitation without fully knocking her out. I heard you. I'm sorry, I began, but she shook her head. Don't you dare apologize, she said fiercely. Not for feeling, not for breaking. This is breaking me too, Alex, every single day. I helped her to the small chair we kept on the balcony, adjusting her blankets against the November chill. I just don't want you to think I regret anything, I explained, kneeling before her, or that I'm not strong enough for this. I know you don't regret us, she said, reaching to brush a tear from my cheek, and I never wanted you to be strong enough for this. No one should have to be. She looked up at the night sky, where a few stars were visible despite the city lights. I'm scared, Alex. It was the first time she'd admitted it so plainly, without her usual layer of dark humor or philosophical detachment. The raw honesty of it broke something open between us. Me too, I confessed, laying my head in her lap, feeling her fingers lightly stroking my hair. I'm terrified. We stayed like that for a long while, sharing our fear under the indifferent stars. There was strange comfort in the mutual admission, in finally acknowledging the monster that had been living in our home, sleeping between us in our bed. The next morning brought an unexpected clarity to Eliza. She woke early, asking for help to sit up properly, to have her hair, now a soft fuzz that had begun to regrow in patches, combed. She asked for her favorite sweater instead of the usual hospital gown or pajamas. I want to record something, she announced, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. A video, for you, for after. I hesitated, unsure if I could bear to watch a posthumous message from her. Eliza. Please, she said, reaching for my hand. I need to do this while I still can, while I'm still me. How could I refuse her anything? I set up my laptop, positioning it so she could sit comfortably in bed while recording. Then, at her insistence, I left her alone to make coffee, giving her the privacy she requested. 20 minutes later, she called me back. The laptop was closed, and she looked simultaneously exhausted and relieved, like someone who had just completed a marathon. It's done, she said. Promise me you'll watch it, but not until, after, when you need it most. I nodded, throat tight, placing the laptop on a high shelf, as if the physical distance could somehow delay the moment when I would need its contents. That afternoon, as weak winter sunlight filtered through our windows, Eliza asked me to lay beside her. She curled against my chest, her body fitting perfectly against mine, despite how much of her had been whittled away by disease. I have one more request, she murmured, her fingers playing with the wedding band on my finger, a selfish one. Anything, I promised, meaning it completely. She tilted her face up to mine, her eyes searching. Stay with me until the very end, she said. No hospitals, no emergency interventions, just you and me here in our home. Let me go when it's time. The weight of what she was asking settled heavily on my shoulders. She wanted me to be not just her husband and caretaker, but also her witness, to watch as she took her final breaths, to be present for the moment when she slipped from being my wife to being my memory. Are you sure? I asked, though I already knew her answer. I've never been more sure of anything, she replied, except saying yes to you. I kissed her then, gently, reverently, tasting the salt of tears, hers or mine, I couldn't tell. Then that's what we'll do, I promised, sealing a pact that would be fulfilled sooner than either of us was ready for. That night, as she drifted to sleep in my arms, I whispered into the darkness all the things I wished we had time for, the trips we would have taken, the home we would have built, the arguments and reconciliations that make up a lifetime together. I whispered until my voice grew hoarse, cataloging the future we were being denied, creating it in words since we couldn't create it in reality. And somehow, through the tears and whispered dreams, I felt her hand tighten around mine, a silent acknowledgement that she was listening, that she was with me still, that for this moment at least, death had not yet won. December arrived with a crystalline coldness that seemed to seep through our windows despite the heat cranked to maximum. Eliza's decline accelerated with a swiftness that left me breathless, as if her body, having held on through our wedding, through those precious weeks as my wife, had finally decided to surrender. "I think it's happening," Josephine told me quietly one morning after checking Eliza's vitals. "The transition has begun, days now, maybe a week at most." I nodded, the words washing over me like waves against a shore I'd been dreading to reach. We'd known this was coming, had known it since the day I walked into the wrong hospital room, but the reality of it still felt impossible to comprehend. "What do I need to do?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Just be with her," Josephine replied, her kind eyes holding mine. "Talk to her even when she doesn't seem to hear you. Play music if she liked it. Keep the room peaceful." She squeezed my arm. "And take care of yourself too. This is the hardest part." That night, as snow fell gently outside our window, I pulled my chair close to Eliza's bed. Her breathing had taken on a distinctive pattern, shallow breaths followed by long pauses that made my own lungs seize in sympathetic terror. Her eyes, when open, seemed to look beyond me, focused on something I couldn't see. I held her hand, its papery thinness a stark reminder of how much of her had already departed. "Hey," I said softly, running my thumb across her knuckles where her wedding ring now hung loose despite the guard. "It's snowing, the first real snow of the season." No response, but I continued anyway, describing the silent transformation of the city outside our window, the way the streetlights made the falling flakes glow like embers. I told her about the family across the street who had put up their Christmas decorations that afternoon, multicolored lights blinking cheerfully against the darkening sky. "Remember how you said you always wanted to see the northern lights?" I asked, voice catching. "I think they must look something like this, the snow reflecting the colored lights, making everything seem magical and unreal." Throughout that long night, I talked until my voice grew hoarse, filling the silence between her labored breaths with memories, with dreams, with promises that I would carry her with me always. When dawn broke, pale and tentative, I was still talking, though I had long since run out of words that mattered. The day passed in a fog of visitors, Josephine coming and going, checking vitals, adjusting medications, Wren stopping by briefly, her eyes red-rimmed as she kissed Eliza's forehead and whispered something I couldn't hear, my mother arriving with food I couldn't eat and quiet support I couldn't yet accept. As evening approached again, something shifted. Eliza's breathing, which had been labored but regular, became more erratic. Her hands, which had lain motionless for hours, suddenly clutched at the sheets, at the air, at invisible things only she could perceive. "I'm here," I said, climbing carefully onto the bed beside her, gathering her against me as I had done countless times before. "I'm right here, Eliza, I've got you." Whether she heard me, I'll never know with certainty, but as I held her, her agitation seemed to ease. Her breathing slowed, each exhale a little longer than the one before, until finally, just as the last light faded from the winter sky, she simply didn't inhale again. The moment of her passing was so quiet, so undramatic, that for several seconds I didn't realize what had happened. I kept waiting for her chest to rise again, for the rhythm to continue. When understanding finally penetrated, it wasn't with a crash of grief, but with a strange, hollow recognition, like finally spotting something I'd been told to look for all along. "Eliza," I whispered, though I knew there would be no answer. My fingers found the place on her wrist where her pulse had beaten, finding only stillness. "Oh, my love." What followed exists in my memory as fragments rather than a coherent narrative, calling Josephine, who confirmed what I already knew, the arrival of people to take her body away, standing in our suddenly empty apartment, surrounded by the medical equipment that had been part of our married life, but was now just stuff. I didn't cry, not then. The pain was too vast, too all-encompassing for something as simple as tears. Instead, I moved through the necessary tasks with mechanical precision, calling the funeral home, notifying the handful of people who needed to know, canceling the delivery of medical supplies that would no longer be needed. It wasn't until 2 days later, sitting alone in the funeral home as they asked me question after question about arrangements, that I remembered the video. Eliza's message, waiting for me on the laptop I hadn't touched since she recorded it. That night after returning to my empty apartment, I retrieved the laptop from the high shelf where I'd placed it. For nearly an hour, I just stared at it, afraid to open it, afraid to hear her voice and see her face now that she was gone. Finally, with shaking hands, I opened the file she had saved simply as "For Alex." The screen filled with her face, gaunt but beautiful, her eyes clear and focused in a way they rarely had been in those final weeks. She was wearing the sweater I loved, the one that brought out the blue in her eyes, and she'd arranged herself so the oxygen tubing was mostly out of frame. "Hi, Alex," she began, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "If you're watching this, then I'm gone and you're probably a mess." She laughed softly. "That's okay. You're allowed to be a mess. I'd be worried if you weren't." I paused the video, needing a moment to breathe through the physical pain of seeing her alive when I had just arranged for her cremation. When I felt steady enough, I pressed play again. "I've been thinking about what I want to say to you," she continued, her gaze direct and unwavering, "about how to sum up what these months have meant to me, how to thank you for walking into the wrong hospital room and deciding to stay." She looked down briefly, collecting herself, "But everything I come up with feels inadequate." She shifted slightly, wincing with the movement. "So instead, I want to tell you what I hope for you, not right away. I know you need time to grieve, to be angry, to miss me. Take that time, Alex, feel everything. But when you're ready, when the sharpest edges of loss have softened, I want you to promise me something." Her eyes seemed to look directly into mine, across the divide of time and death. "Promise me you'll live fully. Promise me you'll notice the way light falls through trees in the late afternoon, the way certain songs make your heart expand, the way strangers can become family in an instant. Promise me you'll keep collecting grocery lists and finding poetry in ordinary things." Tears blurred my vision, and I wiped them away impatiently, unwilling to miss a single expression on her face. "Some people might tell you that our love story is tragic," she continued, her voice growing stronger, "that it's sad we had so little time. They're wrong, Alex. What we have, is a miracle. We packed decades of love into months. We didn't waste time on the small stuff. Every "I love you" mattered. Every touch was precious. How many people can say that?" She paused, taking a labored breath. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said quietly. "Not of dying, not of what comes after. The only thing that hurts is leaving you. But I'm not really leaving, am I? Not completely. I'll be in every painting on these walls, in every book we read together, in the way you see the world now." Her eyes filled with tears, but her smile remained steady. "Thank you for making me your wife, Alex. Thank you for loving me enough to marry me even knowing you would become a widower so soon. Thank you for showing me that love doesn't need a future to be real and complete." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, composing herself. "One last thing. In the closet, on the top shelf, there's a wrapped canvas. I finished it last week when you were out getting groceries. It's my gift to you, something to remember me by. But don't look at it right away. Wait until you're ready, you'll know when." She leaned closer to the camera, as if trying to bridge the unbridgeable distance. "I love you, Alex, not past tense, not loved. Love, some things don't die when bodies do." She smiled, radiant despite everything. "Now go live beautifully, my love. That's how you honor what we had." The video ended, freezing on her smile, and I sat in the silent apartment, tears flowing freely now. I didn't go to the closet right away. I couldn't. Instead, I slept that night with my laptop open beside me, Eliza's frozen smile, the last thing I saw before closing my eyes. The funeral, a small, private memorial, passed in a blur. I spoke briefly, trying to convey to the handful of attendees what Eliza had been to me, how she had transformed my life in the span of 8 months. My words felt inadequate, unable to capture the enormity of what had been gained and lost. Afterward, as people dispersed with awkward hugs and well-intentioned platitudes, Ren approached me, holding a small box. "Eliza asked me to give you this," she said, pressing it into my hands. "After everything was over, she said you'd understand." Inside the box was a single grocery list, written in Eliza's distinctive handwriting. It read simply: eggs, bread, milk, Maury time. Love. The last two items were crossed out, with a note in the margin. Already have enough of these, even when it doesn't feel like it. I clutched the paper to my chest, laughing through my tears at this final gift, this perfect distillation of Eliza's spirit. Winter gave way to spring, spring to summer. Grief, I discovered, wasn't a straight line but a spiral. Some days I found myself back at the center of pain, as acute as the day she died. Other days I could breathe more easily, could smile at memories without feeling like my chest would collapse. It was on one such easier day, nearly 6 months after her death, that I finally felt ready to look at the canvas she had mentioned in her video. I found it exactly where she said it would be, carefully wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. With trembling fingers, I carried it to the living room and slowly unwrapped it. What I found took my breath away. It wasn't one of her usual abstract pieces, but a portrait of me sitting by the window, reading. The light in the painting was golden, bathing everything in a warm glow. But what struck me most was how she had painted me, not with the sad, worried expression I had worn so often during her illness, but laughing, my face lifted toward the light, eyes crinkled in genuine joy. And there, reflected in the window glass behind my painted self, was Eliza, not as she had been in her final days, thin and frail, but vibrant, her head covered in the colorful scarves she had worn when her hair first fell out, her smile wide and mischievous. She had painted herself as a reflection, a presence visible but not physically there. At the bottom of the canvas, in her distinctive handwriting, were the words, "This is how I see you, this is how I'll always see you, now see yourself this way too." That painting now hangs in my new apartment, smaller than the one we shared, but filled with light in the way she would have loved. I've started writing, not technical manuals, but stories, some fictional, some true, all influenced by the woman who taught me to see beauty in impermanence. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I imagine the life we might have had in that house by the ocean, with scruffy Picasso chewing our furniture and friends bringing too much wine. I let myself feel the ache of that unrealized future, acknowledging its loss without letting it consume me. Because Eliza was right, our story isn't a tragedy. 8 months of knowing her, 3 months as her husband, changed me more profoundly than the 28 years that preceded our meeting. She showed me how to live while dying. Now I'm learning how to live while remembering. Last week, I found myself doing something I hadn't done since before I met Eliza, sitting in a cafe, collecting abandoned grocery lists. As I smoothed out a crumpled paper that read dog food, birthday candles, batteries, hope, I felt a familiar presence beside me, as real as memory, as enduring as love. "Found a good one?" I could almost hear her ask. And for the first time since her death, my smile came easily, naturally, without the weight of grief dragging at its corners. "The best one yet," I answered to the empty chair beside me. "It has everything we need." Thank you for following Alex and Eliza's journey to its conclusion. Their story reminds us that love isn't measured in years, but in depth, in how completely we allow ourselves to be transformed by another soul, however briefly they share our path. If their story touched your heart, please subscribe for more tales of love that defy conventional boundaries. Share in the comments how this journey affected you, or tell me about a love that changed you, even if it wasn't meant to last forever. Your stories and comments mean everything to me, and I read each one with gratitude for this community we've built together.